Our first reading comes from the book of the prophet Jeremiah 31:15. A voice is heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping. Rachel is weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children because they are no more. Our second reading comes from Matthew chapter 2, verse 18. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation. Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more.
I want to begin the sermon today with a poem. It's been making the rounds. When I first heard it, I thought, oh, that's kind of corny. Then I sat with it yesterday as I was writing amidst the still lingering madness, especially as we see how it's coming clear that Uvalde law enforcement just failed children miserably, and that, wow, who knew good guys with guns not only won't stop a bad guy with the gun, but also now just choose not to. So this poem hit me a little differently when I read it yesterday. I want to share it. It's written by Brian Bilston, and it's called America is a Gun. England is a cup of tea, France a wheel of ripened brie, Greece a short squat olive tree, America is a gun. Brazil is football on the sand, Argentina, Maradona's hand. Germany, an Oompa band. America is a gun. Holland is a wooden shoe, Hungary a goulash stew. Australia, a kangaroo, America is a gun. Japan is a thermal spring. Scotland is a Highland fling. Better to be anything than America with a gun. You know, we used to be baseball, right? That was our national pastime, and that's what we used to be about. And the world thought of us, they saw baseball, and they saw freedom for some, and baseball. And our national pastime is truly a gun. The poem nailed it. One glance at America now, and you see mass shooting after mass shooting, and a cowardice to do anything about it. And the end result is that we get images like these on the screen. I call them new class pictures. There could be thousands of them up there at this point. And we have classes from Sandy Hook Elementary School, Tree of Life Synagogue class. We have the Las Vegas class. We have the Mother Emanuel Church class from Charleston. We have the Paul Club class up there, and the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas class. Again, just to name a few. And now we have two more classes up there, the latest classes. One's 15 days ago. The Buffalo Supermarket class, we call that. And finally, the last class up there, though there could be thousands more again, we have the latest one, the Robb Elementary School class. Where on Tuesday, an 18-year-old walked into a school, locked himself in a classroom. He shot two teachers and killed two teachers. One of them he looked at and said into her eyes, "Good night." And then he shot 19 children with two high-powered rifles he had just purchased legally shortly before from a gun store. In fact, he had to wait. He had to wait until he was 18 before purchasing those guns. He had to wait. Let that sink in. But gun laws don't work, they say, right? He had to wait. And what if he had to wait a few more years? You know? What if he was never able to buy those guns at all because they're illegal to sell? Laws work. This showed us, but apparently even dead children mutilated in what is supposed to be the safety of their classroom 2 days before school was out for the year. Dead, mutilated children cannot move this nation to tougher laws when it comes to guns, because they truly are this nation's pastime now. My God, America is a damn gun. I'm tired. I'm just flat out exhausted, sad. How about you? I feel like I'm just walking in a daze since reeling from the mass shooting in Buffalo. Can't even get over that one, if there is such a thing as getting over it. Remember back, another young man wanted to kill black folks. And this one, he streamed his massacre out. He streamed it. That's where we are in this day and age. He's people to watch him shoot. They're shopping for birthday cakes and groceries. Not into the lie. The big giant lie being perpetuated by Fox News and other white supremacist organizations about something called white replacement theory. Have you heard about this? He was a white supremacist who believed this asinine, disproven idea, according to an article in the Washington Post, is a racist theory that maintains native-born whites are being intentionally displaced as ethnic minorities in nations, including here at home in the U.S. So his sisters and brothers shop. He was going to make his stand there. I didn't even begun to deal with the grief from that nightmare. And then Tuesday, in Uvalde, Texas, and 19 little kids and parents trying to find out what was happening. Where are our children? And good guys with guns just standing around, smearing blood on themselves so that they look hot. And kids calling 911, pleading for someone to send the damn police who are in the hallway. Too afraid to go in. Cowards. Then there's the lies and the spins that come afterwards, right? And then politicians with blood on their hands, throwing their hands up and sending out thoughts and prayers and saying, it's too soon. If only we just had one door. Forget about the fire codes. One door. Dumbest idea I've ever. One door. And then you had parents assembled in a civic center with kids, and parents are watching. Some parents or other parents get reunited with their children, but the numbers of parents left there are going down and down and down till there are just a handful of families that are waiting together, weeping together, hoping and praying together, giving their DNA together. And finally going to reunite after the realization somehow sets in that they're going to go see their children, knowing that those precious smiles and laughter and hug, well, that would all be gone. And instead of a hug, there was just going to be a shattered life, a mutilated body, blood and death, a child gone. What the hell is happening in this world right now? What the hell is happening in this nation right now? It's just too much. It's too much grief and pain. It's too much madness and sadness. It's too much despair and fear. Well, for me, the only silver lining here, if there is one, is that we're all here together, feeling this right now. in this moment. We have one another here to support, people to walk this incredible grief with, people to advocate with, people to get angry with and cry with, people to weep with, people just to be with, and that is good. We have that. I'm glad you found the emotional courage to get out of bed and come here today, actually. I really am, because it's times like these that we need one another. So today is just about being together, online as well. You're part of this community, and it's just a good day to be together, weeping like Rachel, that story together, and about gathering afterwards. I want to gather afterwards to vent our grief and talk about how we're feeling. For those who would like to stick around for kind of a sermon talk back, get some hospitality, and come back in here, and we'll just create a space to talk and to vent, maybe to plan. And then next week, we're going to get really angry. We're going to get angry. We're going to explore the story of Paul turning the world upside down with his fire for justice and love, and ask ourselves how we can do the same when it comes to guns and gun violence. And I was hoping to do them both today, but it just seems like we just got to join with Rachel and just have a day of weeping like she did for her children, and support one another in this time, especially on Memorial Day weekend. We already weep and remember for the many lost to gun violence. This time, the case of those who died in our wars serving our country. There's no scripture text than the one from both Jeremiah and Matthew, because it speaks to the horrors of what we are living through now, and it allows us to see Rachel come alive as a living, breathing manifestation of grief this very day, as parents literally weep for their children. And we literally weep for our nation in tatters with the death of more and more people, to the scourge of gun violence. You see, Rachel, when we first encounter in Genesis, is a sign of both deep and excruciating. It's painful, yet also she stands for a hope for the future. People often miss that if you don't get into the story of her. We first encounter her story in Genesis, her marriage to Jacob and her inability to have children. It's a common theme, I know. The story is really about the formation of the 12 tribes of Israel, between the patriarch Jacob, his two wives, Leah and Rachel, and two of their slaves, who also birthed some of the people that will form the tribes. It's a really interesting story. Google it if you'd like to read it. I'm just going to give you the cliff notes, because that's what we need for today. Anyway, Rachel, she now had a son. God opened her womb. I know, that's another sermon, trust me. God opened her womb, and she bore a son, and she named him Joseph. You've all heard the story of Joseph. And then while that whole group was traveling, and they at least decided to leave, and they were going to travel, some interpret it, might be through too much Christian interpretation, but they're going to travel on to Bethlehem, all of them. And she was pregnant again. And there, on the roadside, she gave birth to her second son. But while she was giving birth to her second son, she died in childbirth. There was a place called Ramah where she died. Text goes, Jacob and his group left Bethel. Before they came to Ephrath, this was near Ramah, Rachel began giving birth to her baby. She was having a lot of trouble with this birth. She was in great pain. When the nurse saw this, she said, "Don't be afraid, Rachel. You're giving birth to another son." Rachel died while giving birth to the son. Before dying, she named the boy Benoni, but Jacob called him Benjamin. That's the backstory. Fast forward to the Jeremiah text that Tom read for us, and we hear the story invoked in a time of utter tragedy. He invokes Rachel. You see, Jeremiah writing 800 or 900 years later, used that very story in the midst of the Babylonian exile around the year 587 BCE, when Babylon sacked the kingdom of Judah and its capital Jerusalem, killing so many Jewish people, and exiling droves of others to become slaves in Babylon. The place that the Babylonians staged their exile from, that crossroads, was called Ramah, near where Rachel was buried. So I use Rachel in the story of her tragic of exiled people going right by there, but he also used the birth of the hope of a new baby boy, a new tribe, and the hope that her son Joseph would save the Israelites later on from famine. He used them as a symbol of the pain of the death and the exile, yet he used them to be hopeful in a future that they would be saved by Joseph, and that they will return and come back through Ramah to return to the land of Israel. They'll pass by there again someday. It's a beautiful story that he used. Rachel weeps a time of terrible tragedy, yet that weeping will not have the final say. Be not afraid, the midwife said to her. Of course, every year at Christmas we hear this same story from Matthew, right? About the massacre of the innocents, where Herod orders that all boys under the age of 2 in Bethlehem shall be killed in hopes the baby Jesus, for whom even the stars stop. So the story goes. Matthew uses Rachel weeping at Ramah for his community as the violence spreads and the children are murdered, they're massacred. But also that her burial spot at Ramah, which looks towards Bethlehem, will stand as another symbol of hope. That something good will come out of this tragedy and this awful violence. And that hope for Matthew's community is Jesus. In Jeremiah, the hope is a return from exile. The hope is the birth of a new way of life, not centered in the violence of the day. And Rachel's cry, her weeping, connects them all as she weeps for what was with the hope of what can be. We need her today. We need her weeping, her recognition of the horrible things that unfold and happen all around us. We need to acknowledge them honestly. But then we need the hope that what her story embodies for us is a return from the pain and the violence to better days ahead and the vision of a restored and redeemed world. Rachel weeps, but in that weeping are the seeds of hope and change. Rachel weeps, and we must weep too before lifting our eyes to the sun again, and we will. My wounded friends, let's do a little collective weeping today. Let's join Rachel. We need to begin a process of trying to let go of this pain a little bit. And so after our service, I encourage you to write a letter to one of our senators, our brave, bold senators who are willing to stand up against the NRA, expressing what it is that you weep for today and why you will never vote for a candidate that is too cowardly to confront the NRA with new laws that have just been proven that they work. Use that story of the sick gunman who followed the law to get his guns and how he would have had to follow the law if he had to wait till he was 21. How maybe a whole lot of stuff would have changed by then. Maybe he would have gotten the mental health help he needed by then. Those 3 years could have been huge. Write about how you don't want those weapons even available for purchase at all. For new laws banning assault weapons, if that's something that you stand for. I stand for that. Those damn guns off the street. 90% of Americans want tougher laws. 90%. Roughly, give or take. That's a high number, right? You can't get 90% of people to come together on anything. Tell them that. Remind them of that, right from your heart, right from your weeping, right from your pain and grief. Just write. The cards are in the gathering space over there. We'll get them off this week. And then come join our discussion afterwards. And then next week, we're going to get fired up. We're going to hear of Paul challenging all sorts of systems to the point that had gotten him almost killed on several occasions, speaking for love and mercy and compassion and justice and advocating for a whole kind of different world that he saw around him in Macedonia. He freed a slave girl and he almost died for it. It'll be Pentecost next week, right? So we'll talk about what we can do to confront the powers in our own time as a church. In this case, politicians beholden to monstrous institutions like the NRA, choosing blood money over the lives of children in classrooms or folks shopping at a grocery store. It's Pentecost next week again, right? So-called birthday of the church, a church that so much of it has moved so far from the life and teachings of Jesus that it's pathetic. Church is just a continuation of the extreme radical right-wing policies and white supremacy. A church that only cares about banning a woman's choice for an abortion but won't ban an assault rifle that will later kill that baby as it grows or as it learns in the classroom. A church that is soulless and evil and beholden to the most divisive impulses that we know. We need to stand up to this church. We need to reclaim our church and challenge those things. We'll do that next week. But we got to weep. Got to weep. And we cannot weep forever. So we'll choose to take a stand later, next week. Today I want to close with Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 8, and some comments on it, and then I want us to sing, We Shall Overcome. Just felt right today. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. There's a time to be born as a renewed nation, and a time to die, though not in a classroom or a grocery store or a church or synagogue, or on the streets by a gun. There's a time to plant hope, and a time to pluck up what is planted, like organizations like the NRA, whose only purpose is to get more guns into the hands of criminals and deranged people, rip them out. There's a time to kill dangerous ideologies. There's a time to heal and to stand with those grieving families right now that are weeping and seeking some kind of healing. It's a time to break down old paradigms that don't serve us anymore, keep us locked in systems of violence. And it's a time to build up a new vision of the church as Jesus intended it, not a violent, careless mass of angry misfits. There's a time to weep, and we will do so for now. And there's a time to laugh, which we're going to do a lot of. We have to have hope in the future. There's a time to mourn, as is happening in too many places right now. And there's a time to dance when the change is finally going to be made and realized. It's a time to throw away stones of judgment, exclusion, and fear. A time to gather stones together, as people will do as they come together in massive numbers to enact change. There's a time to embrace, like a country embracing newer, tougher, stricter gun laws and bans on assault weapons. And a time to refrain from embracing, especially those who sow hatred. There's a time to seek fellow travelers who can ally with us as we fight on. There's a time to lose like those should in elections who advocate only on the side of violence and greed. There's a time to keep marching, to keep writing, to keep advocating. There's a time to throw away, like so many people consider doing to the title Christian in his day, as it doesn't fit him anymore. It's time to tear up old ways, and a time to sow a new story. It's a time to keep silence and prayer for the world of healing. There's a time to speak out for all the victims of gun violence or white supremacy or LGBT discrimination rights or anti-Semitism and more. There's a time to speak up. It's a time to love, and we need a lot of it. There's a time to hate those things that divide and wound. There's a time for war, and that war has come, and it will be waged on guns and gun violence through nonviolence. And there's a time for peace, which we will finally feel when the race is run, and the change is made. We are no longer weeping with Rachel over the deaths of children or folks shopping in a grocery store who were killed by a bad guy with a gun. It's a time for peace. Trust that. For all things there is a time, and our weeping will be transformed into hope and joy, as swords are turned into tools to cultivate the earth, and guns are turned into sculptures of remembrance for those we have lost on the way. And the class photos, they will exist no more. There is a time. Peace be with you all. Amen. Let's sing. We shall overcome. You want to stand or do you want to sit? How do you feel? Sit. Stand if you'd like. Amen. Please be seated.